In the quiet corridors of Crescent Hill High, a shy exchange student was about to face the unthinkable. What started as a routine walk to class took a shocking turn when she came face to face with the school's most feared bullies. Lina Torres wasn't your typical teenager. For over a decade, she'd lived under the watchful eye of her father, a decorated U.S. Navy SEAL, trained in tactical defense and emotional control. Known for her deadly precision and calm under pressure, Lina had been taught one rule: never fight unless you have no choice. When she encountered Tyrell Jefferson reaching for her inappropriately, she had no idea she was walking into danger or igniting a transformation. Lina responded with a blur of controlled fury that would lead to 3 boys on the floor and a school forced to face its own cruelty. What began as survival would become a revolution. The halls of Crescent Hill would never be the same after the quiet girl showed everyone just how loud power can be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Lina Torres had mastered the art of becoming invisible within 72 hours of arriving at any new school. At 16, she had attended 4 different high schools across 3 states following her father's military assignments and her mother's nursing contracts that demanded constant relocation. Each transition required decoding new social hierarchies, understanding unspoken territorial boundaries, and identifying the safest pathways through adolescent warfare zones. Standing 5 feet 2 inches with a compact athletic build, long straight black hair, typically secured in a practical ponytail, and dark brown eyes that missed nothing, Lina had perfected strategic anonymity. This invisibility served as her sanctuary, her shield against the chaos of teenage social structures. What her new classmates at Crescent Hill High couldn't possibly comprehend, what none of her previous schools had discovered, was that Lina had been immersed in tactical training since childhood. Her father, Commander Miguel Torres, a 20-year veteran of the U.S. Navy SEALs, had insisted on comprehensive preparation for a dangerous world. A lifetime of rigorous instruction had transformed her into a precision instrument with razor-sharp instincts and expertise in multiple combat disciplines, including Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and tactical firearms training. She could neutralize threats significantly larger than herself without visible effort, disable attackers with calculated efficiency, and maintain absolute composure under extreme pressure. Yet Lina never displayed these capabilities. Her upbringing had instilled the fundamental principle that combat skills existed exclusively for protection, never for demonstration or dominance. True strength lies in restraint, Mia, her father consistently reminded her during their pre-dawn training sessions. The most dangerous weapon is the one your enemy never sees coming. Additionally, being perpetually the newcomer meant constantly attempting integration rather than distinction. Drawing attention invited scrutiny, and scrutiny invited problems she preferred to avoid entirely. Crescent Hill High sprawled across 23 acres in the affluent suburban district, housing over 2,000 students arranged in rigid social hierarchies that felt more entrenched than military command structures. The school's red brick facade and manicured lawns projected an image of academic excellence and community pride. But Lina's trained eye immediately cataloged the hazardous territories within the first week. The isolated corridor behind the athletic complex where security cameras had convenient blind spots. The secluded courtyard adjacent to the performing arts building where teachers rarely ventured during lunch periods. The main staircase leading to the senior commons where the school's self-appointed elite held court like feudal lords surveying their domain. These social predators operated under the command of Declan Ward, an 18-year-old senior with perfectly styled sandy hair, designer clothing that cost more than most families' monthly rent, and an expression of casual arrogance that somehow escaped faculty notice entirely. His father owned half the commercial real estate in the district, and his mother sat on the school board, ensuring that Declan's transgressions remained mysteriously invisible to administrative oversight. His primary lieutenants included Tyrell Jefferson, a hulking offensive lineman, whose physical dominance far exceeded his intellectual capacity and whose football scholarship dreams made him desperately dependent on maintaining his position within Declan's inner circle. They moved through Crescent Hill High as if they owned it, and in numerous respects they did. Their families donated generously to school programs, their parents golfed with administrators, and their social media followings gave them influence that extended far beyond campus boundaries. They had cultivated a reputation for targeting vulnerable students with surgical precision, selecting victims who lacked the social connections or family resources to effectively retaliate. Lina had received warnings about them before completing her first week of classes. "Stay away from Declan Ward and his crew," whispered Emma Kaplan, a quiet sophomore who shared her advanced placement literature class. Emma was an artistic girl with paint-stained fingers and an observant gaze who recognized something familiar in Lina's careful navigation of social spaces. "They choose someone new every semester. Last year they psychologically destroyed a transfer student from Ohio until his family moved him to private school just to escape the harassment. For nearly a month, Lina had successfully remained beneath their radar. She utilized alternative pathways between classes, avoiding the main thoroughfares where predators congregated. She consumed lunch in the library's quiet sanctuary, surrounded by books instead of potential threats. She maintained maximum inconspicuousness, arriving precisely when classes began and departing immediately when dismissed. Her strategy of tactical invisibility had proven effective in 3 previous schools, and she saw no reason to deviate from established protocol. However, she was discovering that invisibility possessed temporal limitations. Eventually, even the most carefully maintained anonymity would intersect with predatory attention, and when that moment arrived, the only variable that mattered was preparation. Lina had been preparing her entire life, though she hoped never to require such preparation within the presumably safe confines of suburban American education. The initial contact occurred on a Tuesday morning in late October. Lina was navigating toward her advanced placement biology class, her arms filled with textbooks and laboratory notebooks, when she rounded the corner near the science wing and nearly collided with Tyrell Jefferson. His massive frame blocked the corridor like a human roadblock, and his narrowed eyes immediately locked onto her with predatory assessment. "Watch where you're going," he growled, examining her with the calculating gaze of a hunter evaluating potential prey. His voice carried the casual authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance, and his physical positioning suggested this encounter was not accidental. "My apologies," Lina replied quietly, attempting to sidestep around his considerable bulk while maintaining respectful distance. Every instinct screamed danger, but she forced herself to project submissive body language, hoping to diffuse the situation through apparent vulnerability. "Hold up," Tyrell called after her as she attempted to continue toward her destination. "You're that transfer student, right? What's your name?" Lina hesitated, briefly calculating whether engagement or evasion posed greater risk before responding. Without turning to face him directly, "Lina Torres." "Lina Torres," Tyrell repeated, drawing out each syllable with mock consideration, as if testing how her name felt in his mouth. "Better watch yourself around here, Lina Torres. Accidents happen to people who don't pay attention." She sensed his predatory gaze following her retreat down the corridor, and unfamiliar tension coiled in her stomach despite years of training designed to maintain composure under pressure. She recognized that evaluating expression, the calculating assessment of a predator, determining whether potential prey was worth the energy expenditure required for a successful hunt. In that moment, Lina understood that her carefully maintained invisibility had finally failed, and the consequences of that failure would demand decisions she had hoped never to make within the supposedly civilized environment of American public education. The remainder of the day passed without incident, but Lina remained hyper-vigilant, monitoring, peripheral vision scanning for potential threats, and identifying multiple escape routes in every classroom and corridor. Her training had taught her that initial contact was merely reconnaissance, that true predators studied their targets extensively before committing to sustained harassment campaigns. She hoped that projecting appropriate submissiveness might convince them to seek easier prey, but experience had taught her that hope was a luxury she could rarely afford. That evening in the converted basement gym of their temporary housing, Lina worked through her frustrations on the heavy bag practicing combination, strikes and grappling techniques, while her mind processed the day's encounter. Each impact against the leather surface represented her growing frustration with the necessity of constant relocation, the exhaustion of perpetual social navigation, and the unfairness of being targeted simply for existing in spaces where others believed she didn't belong. "Remember, Mia," her father's voice echoed in her memory from countless training sessions. "The enemy reveals their intentions through their actions, not their words. Study their patterns, identify their weaknesses, and prepare for the moment when restraint becomes impossible." The harassment began subtly, as it invariably does with predators who understand that gradual escalation avoids detection while systematically destroying their target's psychological defenses. Lina's textbooks were deliberately knocked from her hands at her locker by passing students who offered hollow apologies while their companions snickered nearby. Her carefully packed lunch disappeared from the cafeteria table during the brief moments she stepped away to retrieve utensils. Anonymous notes appeared in her locker containing crude drawings and xenophobic commentary about foreign exchange. Students who should return to their own countries, not Emma Kaplan, observed these incidents with growing concern, recognizing the familiar pattern of systematic harassment she had witnessed during previous semesters. During their shared literature class, she attempted to offer support through careful whispered warnings about timing and location hazards, but Emma's own precarious social position limited her ability to provide meaningful assistance. She existed in her own carefully maintained bubble of artistic invisibility, and direct intervention would only expand the target zone to include herself. "They're testing you," Emma explained during one of their brief conversations in the library's poetry section, where they could speak without being overheard by potential informants. "Declan always starts slow to see how much someone will tolerate before fighting back or reporting them. If you show weakness now, it only gets worse." Lina appreciated Emma's concern, but her training had taught her that emotional responses to provocation were precisely what predators sought to elicit. Retaliation would justify escalation, and administrative intervention would only provide temporary relief while creating long-term resentment. Her father's voice echoed in her mind during these moments of strategic consideration. "Choose your battles, Mia. Some fights are worth having, and some fights are worth avoiding, but never enter combat without understanding the full cost of victory." The INCIDENTs intensified following her refusal to react to their initial provocations. Her combination lock was tampered with, requiring maintenance requests that drew unwanted administrative attention. Her backpack was searched during lunch periods, with personal items rearranged or removed entirely. Whispers followed her through hallways, spreading fabricated rumors about her transfer reasons, her family's economic status, and her academic capabilities. The psychological warfare was methodical and persistent, designed to erode her confidence, while maintaining plausible deniability. Miss Leone, her advanced placement literature teacher, began noticing the subtle signs of targeted harassment during class discussions. As a former military spouse who had navigated multiple relocations herself, she recognized the disciplined composure that masked growing frustration in Lina's carefully controlled responses. During a discussion of persecution themes in contemporary literature, Ms. Leone observed how Lina's jaw tightened when classmates made seemingly innocent comments about outsiders and belonging. Cultural assimilation presents unique challenges, Ms. Leone mentioned during a private conversation after class, particularly for students who possess capabilities their peers fail to recognize. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to reveal one's true nature. The comment was carefully phrased to avoid direct intervention while acknowledging the situation's complexity. Ms. Leone had learned through experience that direct adult involvement often escalated teenage conflicts beyond their original scope. But she wanted Lina to understand that her struggles were observed and that support existed when circumstances demanded it. The harassment reached a new level when Declan Ward personally involved himself in what had previously been delegated to his subordinates. He materialized beside Lina's table in the cafeteria during what she had believed was a safe moment to consume lunch in relative peace. His presence immediately altered the atmospheric tension as surrounding students recognized the significance of his direct attention. "So you're our new charity case," Declan stated conversationally, settling into the chair across from her, as though they were longtime friends meeting for casual discussion. His voice carried practiced charm that masked underlying menace, and his positioning blocked her most direct escape route while maintaining the appearance of friendly interaction. Lina kept her attention focused on her meal, fighting every instinct that demanded threat assessment and defensive positioning. She had learned that predators interpreted eye contact as either challenge or invitation, and both responses led to escalation she preferred to avoid. "Aren't we all charity cases in one way or another?" she replied, evenly continuing to eat while her peripheral vision tracked his companions' positions and identified potential weapons among everyday cafeteria items. Declan's smile widened at her response, suggesting he interpreted her deflection as either cleverness or defiance. "Here's the situation, transfer girl. There's a specific hierarchy at Crescent Hill High, and rule number 1 is understanding your position within that hierarchy." He leaned closer, dropping his voice to a more intimate register that forced her to acknowledge his presence. "Your position isn't among the regular students. Your position is somewhere we'll determine for you based on your behavior and attitude." Lina felt her muscles instinctively tense her body, preparing for potential confrontation despite her conscious efforts to maintain submissive posture. She forced herself to breathe steadily, utilizing the meditation techniques her father had taught her for managing adrenaline responses during high-stress situations. This wasn't a training facility or sanctioned competition where combat was expected and authorized. This was a public school where violence would result in administrative consequences that could jeopardize her academic future. "Thanks for the orientation," she replied, gathering her belongings with movements that appeared casual but actually positioned her for rapid departure. "I'm sure I'll figure out where I fit." Declan's hand shot out, grasping her wrist, not painfully but firmly enough to communicate his authority while maintaining the appearance of casual contact. "That's not how this works. You don't get to figure it out independently. We figure it out for you, and you accept our decision gracefully." For a fraction of a second, Lina calculated precisely how she could break that grip. The angle of his thumb placement made him vulnerable to a simple twist that would force immediate release. His seated position left him unable to defend against a strike to his solar plexus or throat. His companion's positions created clear pathways for tactical withdrawal once the initial threat was neutralized. The entire sequence would require less than 3 seconds to execute and would establish definitively that she was not the helpless victim they had assumed her to be. Instead, she did what was expected of a timid foreign exchange student. She pulled away with apparent difficulty and hurried from the cafeteria while their laughter echoed behind her like a promise of future consequences. The sound followed her through the corridors, embedding itself in her memory as a reminder that her carefully maintained invisibility had failed completely, and that more direct measures might soon become necessary. The following weeks brought systematic escalation designed to break Lina's psychological defenses through relentless pressure and social isolation. Her few tentative friendships were sabotaged through whispered campaigns suggesting she was dangerous, unstable, or somehow responsible for her own harassment. Her academic performance became a target with anonymous complaints to teachers about her participation in class discussions and fabricated concerns about her understanding of American cultural references in literature assignments. Emma Kaplan continued providing what support she could through subtle warnings about timing and locations. But her own social position remained precarious, and direct intervention would only expand the conflict to include additional victims. She began secretly documenting incidents through careful photography and detailed written observations, recognizing that evidence might eventually become necessary for administrative or legal intervention. "They're building toward something," Emma warned during one of their brief conversations in the library's reference section, where they could speak without being overheard. Declan never sustains campaigns this long without planning some kind of public humiliation. Last year's victim was cornered in the gymnasium storage room, and they recorded everything for social media distribution. Lina appreciated the intelligence, but her training had taught her that preparation required understanding enemy capabilities and intentions, rather than simply hoping for favorable outcomes. She began conducting her own reconnaissance, identifying Declan's patterns of movement throughout the school, his preferred locations for confrontation, and the timing of his most aggressive behaviors. Knowledge represented power, and power would be necessary when restraint finally became impossible. The catalyst arrived on a Friday afternoon in November, when autumn rain had driven most students indoors, and the corridors buzzed with the restless energy of approaching weekend freedom. Lina was retrieving materials from her locker when she became aware of approaching footsteps that carried the distinctive rhythm of coordinated movement. She turned to find Declan Ward flanked by Tyrell Jefferson and two other members of his inner circle, effectively blocking her escape routes while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. "Time for a proper introduction," Declan announced, with false joviality that masked predatory intent. "We've been too polite about welcoming you to our school community." The corridor was not entirely empty, but the few remaining students quickly departed when they recognized the situation's potential for violence. This was clearly planned timing, designed to minimize witnesses while maximizing Lina's psychological isolation. Her training immediately shifted from passive awareness to active threat assessment as she cataloged each opponent's positioning, strengths, and vulnerabilities. "I appreciate the welcome," Lina replied, maintaining steady eye contact while her body automatically adjusted to optimal defensive stance. "But I should probably head home before the rain gets worse." "The rain can wait," Tyrell interjected, stepping closer to reduce her maneuvering space. "We want to make sure you understand your place here before the weekend." Declan's smile never wavered as he moved within arm's reach, violating her personal space with calculated precision. "See, the problem is that you've been too independent, too standoffish. That's not how our community works. We take care of new students by helping them understand our expectations." His hand reached toward her shoulder in a gesture that appeared friendly, but carried unmistakable undertones of dominance and possession. In that moment, Lina recognized that further de-escalation was impossible, and that the choice before her was between submission and resistance, between accepting victimization or revealing capability she had hoped never to display within the presumably civilized environment of American public education. "Don't touch me," she said quietly, her voice carrying absolute finality despite its controlled volume. Declan's smile widened as his fingers made contact with her shoulder, interpreting her warning as invitation rather than boundary. "What are you going to do about it, transfer girl? Run home to daddy?" The comment about her father triggered something deeper than personal offense. These predators had no comprehension of what her father represented or the sacrifices he had made to protect people who would never understand the dangers he faced on their behalf. They had no understanding of the discipline required to maintain restraint in the face of provocation or the terrible consequences that awaited those who mistook mercy for weakness. Final warning, Lina said, stepping back to create optimal distance. For what was about to become inevitable. Remove your hand and walk away. Instead, Declan's grip tightened possessively, while his companions moved closer, sensing the approaching climax of their carefully orchestrated campaign. Their formation was tactically unsound, with overlapping fields of engagement that would interfere with each other's movement. They had positioned themselves like bullies rather than fighters, and that mistake would determine the outcome of the next 30 seconds. Or what? Declan challenged, his voice carrying absolute confidence in his social position and physical dominance. You'll tell the principal? You'll call your mommy? Face it, sweetheart, you're alone here, and we're going to teach you exactly where you belong in our school. The words "sweetheart," delivered with such casual contempt, represented the final boundary crossed. Lina's training kicked in with absolute precision as muscle memory overrode conscious thought, and 16 years of preparation culminated in 3 seconds of devastating efficiency. Her father's voice echoed in her mind with perfect clarity. When restraint becomes impossible, Mia, make sure they never forget the lesson. What happened next would be discussed in hushed whispers throughout Crescent Hill High for years to come, becoming the stuff of legend among students who witnessed firsthand what occurred when predators finally encountered prey that possessed the capability and willingness to fight back with professional efficiency and zero mercy. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation executed by someone who had been trained from childhood to neutralize threats with maximum efficiency and minimum unnecessary force. Lina's right hand moved in a fluid arc, breaking Declan's grip on her shoulder with a technique that hyperextended his thumb while simultaneously driving her left elbow into his solar plexus. The impact expelled all air from his lungs, doubling him over and leaving him gasping like a fish pulled from water. Tyrell Jefferson, recognizing that their carefully orchestrated intimidation had transformed into something far more dangerous, lunged forward with his considerable bulk. His approach was telegraphed and clumsy, relying on size rather than skill. Lina sidestepped his charge with fluid grace, using his momentum against him as she swept his legs and guided his massive frame into the row of lockers with a metallic crash that echoed through the corridor. Like a gunshot, the 2 remaining members of Declan's inner circle hesitated, their predatory confidence evaporating as they witnessed their seemingly helpless victim dismantle their leadership with clinical efficiency. One of them, a lean boy named Marcus Chun, attempted to grab Lina from behind. She sensed his approach without turning, ducking low and driving her shoulder into his midsection, before executing a perfect hip throw that sent him sliding across the polished floor. The 4th attacker, recognizing the impossibility of the situation, turned to flee. Lina allowed him to escape, understanding that pursuing retreating enemies would transform justified self-defense into assault. Her father's training had emphasized proportional response, neutralize immediate threats, protect yourself and others, but never escalate beyond necessity. The entire confrontation lasted less than 15 seconds. Declan Ward lay curled on the floor, still struggling to breathe while clutching his hyperextended thumb. Tyrell Jefferson sat dazed against the lockers, his pride damaged more severely than his body. Marcus Chun groaned softly while attempting to determine whether any ribs had been cracked during his unexpected flight across the hallway. Lina stood in the center of the corridor, her breathing steady and controlled, her posture relaxed despite having just dismantled 3 attackers with textbook precision. Her dark eyes surveyed the scene with the calm assessment of a professional evaluating completed work. She felt no satisfaction in the violence, no triumph in their pain. This had been necessity, not vengeance. "I warned you," she said quietly, her voice carrying the same controlled tone she had maintained throughout the encounter. "You should have listened." Emma Kaplan emerged from behind a pillar where she had been recording the entire incident on her phone, her artistic eye having recognized the historical significance of the moment. The footage would prove crucial in protecting Lina from administrative backlash, providing irrefutable evidence that she had been defending herself against multiple attackers who had initiated the confrontation. "Holy shit," Emma whispered, her usual quiet demeanor replaced by awed respect. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "My father taught me," Lina replied simply, gathering her scattered belongings with efficient movements. "He said there might come a time when I would need to protect myself." Other students began emerging from classrooms and hiding places, drawn by the sounds of conflict and the sudden absence of the usual hallway chatter. Their expressions ranged from shock to admiration to fear as they processed the sight of Crescent Hill High's most feared bullies lying defeated on the floor while their quiet, unassuming victim calmly organized her backpack. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Principal Danner arrived within minutes, summoned by the commotion and the rapidly spreading rumors that something unprecedented had occurred in the junior wing. He was a middle-aged man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses who had been hired specifically to maintain order and academic standards in the district's most prestigious high school. His expression suggested he was prepared to discipline. Another routine altercation between students who had allowed teenage emotions to override common sense. "What happened here?" he demanded, surveying the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had dealt with countless disciplinary incidents throughout his career. Multiple voices began speaking simultaneously, offering conflicting accounts of the confrontation. Some students claimed that Lina had attacked unprovoked, while others insisted that Declan and his friends had cornered her. The cacophony of accusations and explanations threatened to obscure the truth beneath layers of teenage bias and social positioning. "I have video evidence," Emma announced, holding up her phone with the confidence of someone who possessed irrefutable documentation. "Everything that happened is recorded here." Principal Danner's expression shifted from routine annoyance to serious concern as he recognized the potential implications of documented violence involving some of the school's most prominent students. He quickly cleared the corridor of spectators, instructing teachers to escort students to designated areas while he initiated proper administrative protocols. "Everyone involved comes to my office immediately," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Miss Kaplan, please bring your recording device. We'll need to review all available evidence before making any determinations about disciplinary action." As the group moved toward the administrative offices, Lina remained calm and cooperative, understanding that her actions would be scrutinized by people who had never faced genuine threats or understood the difference between violence and self-defense. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "When you're forced to act, Mia, own your actions completely. Never apologize for protecting yourself, but always be prepared to explain why protection was necessary." The administrative review would determine whether her future at Crescent Hill High remained viable, but Lina felt no regret about her choices. She had given them multiple opportunities to withdraw, had attempted de-escalation at every stage, and had used precisely the amount of force necessary to neutralize the threat they presented. If the school's administration failed to recognize justified self-defense, then perhaps this institution was not the right environment for completing her education. The principal's office felt smaller than usual with 6 people crowded around. Principal Danner's desk, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Lina sat with perfect posture, her hands folded calmly in her lap, while Declan Ward slouched in his chair with his right hand wrapped in ice, and his pride wounded more severely than his thumb. Tyrell Jefferson kept shifting uncomfortably, occasionally, touching his ribs where they had impacted the lockers, while Marcus Chun maintained sullen silence. Emma Kaplan held her phone like a shield, the recorded evidence representing the only objective witness to the confrontation. Principal Danner had spent the previous 20 minutes reviewing the footage multiple times, his expression growing more troubled with each viewing as he recognized the legal and Administrative complexities of the situation. Let me make sure I understand the sequence of events correctly, Principal Danner began, his voice carefully neutral as he addressed the assembled students. Ms. Torres, you were retrieving materials from your locker when these three young men approached you. Mr. Ward, you initiated physical contact despite her verbal objections. Ms. Torres issued multiple warnings before defending herself. Is this accurate? Declan's jaw tightened as he realized that the video evidence made denial impossible. She overreacted. I barely touched her shoulder. What she did was completely disproportionate to the situation. Disproportionate to being cornered by three people who had been harassing me for weeks. Lina's voice remained steady, but her dark eyes flashed with controlled anger. I used exactly the amount of force necessary to protect myself from unwanted contact and potential assault. You could have seriously injured us, Tyrell interjected, his usual bravado replaced by genuine concern about the ease with which she had neutralized him. Where did you learn to fight like that? My father is a Navy SEAL, Lina replied with quiet pride. He taught me that predators understand only strength and that mercy is often mistaken for weakness. I gave you multiple opportunities to withdraw peacefully. Principal Danner leaned back in his chair, processing the implications of having a student with professional combat training involved in a physical altercation. His administrative experience had prepared him for typical teenage conflicts, but this situation required careful navigation of legal, disciplinary, and public relations considerations. Ms. Torres, while I understand that you were defending yourself, the level of force you employed raises concerns about proportional response. Our zero-tolerance policy regarding violence applies to all students regardless of their training or family background. Zero tolerance for violence, but not for harassment. Lina's composure cracked slightly, revealing the frustration that had been building for weeks. These three have been systematically intimidating me since my first week. Here, they've damaged my property, spread rumors about me, and isolated me from other students. Today they cornered me and initiated physical contact, despite my clear objections. At what point does your zero-tolerance policy protect victims instead of enabling perpetrators? Emma cleared her throat nervously before speaking. Principal Danner, I've been documenting their harassment campaign for weeks. I have photographs of damaged property, screenshots of social media posts, and witness testimony from other students. This wasn't an isolated incident of violence. This was self-defense against sustained persecution. The room fell silent as Principal Danner absorbed this information. His position required balancing multiple competing interests, maintaining school safety, protecting student rights, avoiding legal liability, and managing public perception. The presence of documented evidence complicated his ability to dismiss the incident as a simple disciplinary matter. Mr. Ward, Mr. Jefferson, Mr. Chen, is it true that you've been engaging in systematic harassment of Ms. Torres? Principal Danner's tone carried the weight of administrative authority backed by potential consequences. The three boys exchanged glances, recognizing that their carefully orchestrated campaign had been exposed and documented. Declan's family connections and social position offered some protection, but video evidence of assault initiation created vulnerabilities that even his father's influence might not be able to overcome. We were just trying to help her fit in, Declan said lamely, his usual confidence replaced by defensive uncertainty. Some of the other students were concerned about her antisocial behavior. We thought friendly outreach might help with her integration. Friendly outreach that required cornering her in an empty corridor and initiating unwanted physical contact. Principal Danner's skepticism was evident in his tone. Ms. Kaplan's documentation suggests a pattern of behavior that contradicts your explanation. The administrative review continued for another hour as Principal Danner interviewed each participant, separately reviewed additional evidence, and consulted with the district's legal counsel about potential liability issues. The complexity of the situation required careful documentation and measured responses that would withstand scrutiny from parents, school board members, and potentially the media. When the individual interviews concluded, Principal Danner reconvened the group to announce his preliminary decisions. His expression was grave as he addressed the assembled students, understanding that his choices would establish precedents for handling similar situations in the future. After reviewing all available evidence and consulting with appropriate authorities, "I'm prepared to make the following determinations," he began, his voice carrying the weight of administrative finality. "Ms. Torres, while your response was disproportionate in terms of force applied, the evidence clearly demonstrates that you were defending yourself against multiple attackers who had initiated the confrontation. No disciplinary action will be taken against you at this time." Lina felt a surge of relief, though her expression remained carefully controlled. Justice had been served, but she understood that the social consequences of her actions would extend far beyond administrative decisions. "Mr. Ward, Mr. Jefferson, Mr. Chun, the evidence of systematic harassment, combined with today's assault initiation, constitutes serious violations of our anti-bullying policies. You are suspended pending a full disciplinary review. Additionally, restraining orders will be issued prohibiting any contact with Ms. Torres on or off school property." The three boys' faces reflected shock and anger as they realized that their positions of social privilege had not protected them from consequences when their actions were documented and witnessed. The comfortable immunity they had enjoyed was crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. "This is ridiculous," Declan protested, his voice rising with indignation. "My father will hear about this. You can't punish us for defending school traditions against some foreign troublemaker who—" "Mr. Ward," Principal Danner interrupted sharply, "I suggest you consider your next words very carefully. Discriminatory language combined with your current disciplinary status could result in permanent expulsion rather than suspension." The finality in his tone silenced Declan's protests, though his expression promised that this confrontation was far from over. His family's influence would be mobilized to minimize consequences and restore his position. But the video evidence and documented harassment campaign created obstacles that even wealth and connections might not be able to overcome. The aftermath of the corridor confrontation rippled through Crescent Hill High like seismic waves, fundamentally altering the social landscape in ways that would take weeks to fully understand. News of the incident spread through social media channels faster than administrative attempts to control the narrative, with Emma's video footage becoming the most shared content in the school's recent history. Lina's transformation from invisible transfer student to legendary badass occurred overnight, though she found the attention more burdensome than beneficial. Students who had previously ignored her existence now regarded her with a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity that made her original goal of invisibility impossible to maintain. Her carefully constructed anonymity had been destroyed by 30 seconds of necessary violence. "You're famous," Emma observed during their literature class, noting how other students stole glances at Lina while whispering among themselves. "Everyone wants to know more about the quiet girl who took down Declan Ward's entire crew." "Fame wasn't the objective," Lina replied quietly, her attention focused on Ms. Leone's discussion of power dynamics in contemporary fiction. "I just wanted to be left alone to complete my education in peace." Ms. Leone had been monitoring the situation carefully, recognizing that Lina's actions had exposed deeper problems within the school's social structure. As a former military spouse who had navigated multiple relocations and cultural adjustments, she understood the complexities of maintaining identity while adapting to new environments. "Sometimes standing up for yourself requires accepting visibility," Ms. Leone commented during a private conversation after class. "The question becomes what you do with that visibility once you have it." The suggestion carried deeper implications than casual advice. Lina's demonstration of capability had created opportunities for leadership and influence that could benefit other students facing similar harassment. Her unique position as someone who had successfully confronted the school's most powerful bullies gave her voice significant weight in discussions about institutional change. Zara Malik, president of the Girls Empowerment Club and a senior who had been frustrated by the administration's previous inaction regarding harassment, approached Lina during lunch with a proposal that would formalize her newfound influence. "We want to invite you to speak at our next meeting," Zara explained, her tone carrying both respect and strategic calculation. "What you did shows other students that they don't have to accept intimidation passively. Your story could inspire real change." Lina hesitated, understanding that public speaking would further erode her preferred anonymity while potentially creating new targets for retaliation. However, her father's training had emphasized that with capability came responsibility, and her actions had already demonstrated her willingness to protect herself when necessary. "I'm not sure I'm the right person to represent anyone else's struggles," Lina replied carefully. "What happened was self-defense, not activism. Sometimes self-defense becomes activism whether you intend it or not," Zara countered. "You've proven that these bullies can be stopped. Other students need to see that resistance is possible." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several underclassmen who had been seeking courage to approach Lina throughout the week. Their leader, a freshman named David Park, had been targeted by some of Declan's associates before the suspension and was hoping to learn protective techniques. "Could you teach us some basic self-defense?" David asked nervously, his request carrying the desperation of someone who had experienced the helplessness of systematic intimidation. "Nothing aggressive, just enough to protect ourselves if something happens." Lina recognized the fear in his voice, the same vulnerability she had felt during her first weeks at previous schools, when she had been forced to navigate hostile social environments without allies or protection. Her father's training had given her advantages that most students lacked, but basic awareness and defensive techniques could be shared without creating additional dangers. "Self-defense is about avoiding conflict, not seeking it," Lina explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been trained by professionals. "The goal is to create opportunities for escape, not to defeat attackers." Word of Lina's willingness to share defensive knowledge spread quickly through the student body, particularly among those who had previously been targeted by Declan's network of associates. The suspension had created a power vacuum that other bullies were attempting to fill, making protective skills more valuable than ever. Principal Danner became aware of these informal training sessions through concerned reports from teachers who observed students practicing defensive techniques in empty classrooms and secluded courtyards. His initial instinct was to prohibit such activities, but consultation with the district's legal counsel revealed that self-defense instruction fell within acceptable parameters of student organization. "Ms. Torres, I understand you've been providing safety instruction to other students," Principal Danner mentioned during a brief meeting to discuss her academic progress. "While I appreciate your desire to help your classmates, I need to ensure that such activities don't escalate tensions or create additional security concerns." "I'm teaching situational awareness and escape techniques," Lina replied, her tone respectful but firm. "Nothing aggressive or confrontational. My father always emphasized that the best fight is the one you never have to have." The administrative blessing, however reluctant, legitimized Lina's emerging role as a protector and instructor within the school's social structure. Her unique combination of capability, restraint, and moral authority made her an ideal candidate for leadership among students who had previously felt powerless against institutional bullying. However, not everyone appreciated the shift in social dynamics that Lina's actions had initiated. Declan Ward's suspension had created resentment among his supporters, who viewed his punishment as excessive and discriminatory. Anonymous threats began appearing in Lina's locker, warning her that consequences awaited those who disrupted established hierarchies. "You think you're tough because you caught us off guard," read one note written in block letters designed to avoid handwriting identification. "But you're still just a foreign freak who doesn't belong here. Watch your back." Emma discovered several of these messages while helping Lina organize her materials, immediately recognizing the escalation in threatening language and the potential for organized retaliation. Her documentation instincts kicked in as she photographed each note for potential evidence while advising Lina about security precautions. "They're trying to intimidate you into backing down," Emma observed, her artistic eye noting the careful preparation that had gone into the anonymous threats. "This feels organized, like they're planning something more serious than random harassment." Lina examined the messages with tactical assessment, recognizing patterns in phrasing and timing that suggested coordination among multiple individuals. Her father's training had prepared her for escalation scenarios where initial confrontations led to more sophisticated retaliation attempts. "Let them plan," Lina said quietly, her voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who had been preparing for such challenges her entire life. "They've already learned that I won't be intimidated by words or actions. If they want to escalate further, they'll discover that I'm better prepared than they imagine." The stage was being set for a more complex confrontation that would test not only Lina's combat skills, but her ability to protect the community of students who had begun looking to her for leadership and security. The question was no longer whether she could defend herself, but whether she could defend others while maintaining the moral authority that made her influence legitimate. The transformation of Crescent Hill High's social ecosystem accelerated as word spread about Lina's informal self-defense workshops and her willingness to stand up to the institutional bullying that had terrorized students for years. What had begun as individual survival had evolved into community protection, with Lina finding herself at the center of a movement she had never intended to lead. Commander Miguel Torres called his daughter that evening, his voice carrying the mixture of pride and concern that came from recognizing his training's effectiveness while worrying about its consequences. The military network had informed him about the incident through unofficial channels, and he wanted to ensure that Lina understood the broader implications of her actions. "Mia, I heard about what happened at school," he began, his tone carefully neutral as he assessed her emotional state. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Papa," Lina replied, settling into her bedroom where she could speak privately. "I did exactly what you taught me. I tried to avoid conflict, gave multiple warnings, and used only the force necessary to protect myself." "I'm proud of you for standing up to bullies," Miguel said, his voice warming with paternal approval. "But I'm also concerned about what comes next. When you demonstrate capability like that, people start expecting you to solve problems that aren't your responsibility." His observation proved prophetic as Lina's phone buzzed with messages from classmates, seeking advice about their own harassment situations. Students who had never spoken to her before were reaching out with stories of intimidation, requesting guidance about whether to report incidents or handle them independently. "I'm not trying to become anyone's savior," Lina explained to her father, scrolling through the accumulating messages. "I just want to finish my education and move on to the next phase of my life. Sometimes life doesn't give us that choice." Miguel replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience with unwanted leadership responsibilities. "When you have capabilities that others lack, you have obligations whether you want them or not. The question is how you handle those obligations responsibly." The conversation ended with his reminder that she could call him any time if situations escalated beyond her ability to manage alone. His support provided emotional grounding as she navigated the complex social dynamics that her actions had unleashed. The next morning brought a formal request from Principal Danner to meet with district administrators about formalizing student safety programs. The incident had attracted attention from school board members who recognized both the liability issues and the potential for positive change that Lina's actions represented. "Ms. Torres, we're impressed by your commitment to student safety," explained Dr. Sarah Chun, the district's curriculum coordinator, as she reviewed documentation of the informal workshops. "We'd like to explore incorporating structured self-defense instruction into our physical education program." The proposal represented institutional recognition of the problems that had been festering beneath the surface of Crescent Hill High's polished reputation. Administrative willingness to formalize protective training acknowledged that student safety required more than disciplinary policies and security cameras. "I'd be happy to help design a curriculum," Lina replied, recognizing the opportunity to create systematic change rather than simply responding to individual crises. But the focus should be on awareness and de-escalation rather than combat techniques. Her condition reflected the wisdom of her father's training, which emphasized that the most effective protection came from avoiding dangerous situations rather than fighting through them. The program would need to balance practical safety skills with the school's responsibility to maintain a peaceful learning environment. Ms. Leone volunteered to serve as faculty advisor for the program, her experience with military culture providing valuable perspective on adapting tactical concepts for civilian education. Her support legitimized the initiative while providing administrative oversight that would satisfy liability concerns. "We'll call it the Personal Safety and Awareness Program," Ms. Leone suggested during a planning meeting. "The emphasis will be on situational awareness, conflict avoidance, and basic protective techniques rather than offensive capabilities." Zara Malik's Girls Empowerment Club became the organizational framework for implementing the program, with Lina serving as a consultant rather than the primary instructor. The structure distributed responsibility while leveraging her expertise and credibility within the student body. The first formal workshop attracted over 50 students, ranging from freshmen who had been intimidated by upperclassmen to seniors who had endured years of harassment without effective recourse. The diversity of participants reflected the widespread nature of the problems that had been normalized within the school's culture. "The goal isn't to turn you into fighters," Lina explained to the assembled group, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had successfully defended herself against multiple attackers. "The goal is to give you confidence and options when faced with threatening situations." The curriculum covered basic awareness techniques, recognizing predatory behavior, identifying escape routes, understanding legal boundaries, and knowing when to seek help from authorities. Physical techniques focused on creating distance and opportunities for escape rather than prolonged confrontation. "Most bullies are cowards who target people they perceive as weak," Lina continued, demonstrating simple defensive moves that could be executed by students of varying physical capabilities. "When you project confidence and show that you won't be an easy victim, most predators will move on to easier targets." Emma documented the workshops through photography and video, creating materials that could be shared with other schools facing similar challenges. Her artistic eye captured the transformation in students' posture and confidence as they learned protective techniques and realized they weren't powerless against intimidation. The program's success attracted attention from parents who had been frustrated by their children's reports of harassment that seemed to be ignored by school administrators. Several families reached out to express gratitude for the practical training their children were receiving. "My daughter comes home from school excited about learning instead of afraid of what might happen in the hallways," wrote one parent in a letter to Principal Danner. "Ms. Torres has given her tools that she can use for the rest of her life." However, not all feedback was positive. Some parents complained that self-defense instruction was inappropriate for educational settings and that the focus should be on preventing conflict rather than preparing students for violence. The criticism reflected broader cultural debates about personal responsibility versus institutional protection. "We're not teaching violence," Lina explained during a parent meeting called to address concerns. We're teaching students to recognize threatening situations and respond appropriately. The same skills that help them avoid bullying will help them navigate dangerous situations throughout their lives. The program's legitimacy was further enhanced when Commander Torres agreed to conduct a special presentation about situational awareness and personal safety. His military credentials and obvious pride in his daughter's actions provided authoritative support for the curriculum's underlying philosophy. My daughter learned these skills because the world can be dangerous, Miguel explained to the assembled parents and students. But the goal was never to make her dangerous. The goal was to make her prepared, confident, and capable of protecting herself and others when necessary. His presentation concluded with a reminder that the most important aspect of self-defense was the wisdom to know when force was necessary and when it should be avoided. The distinction between capability and aggression formed the foundation of responsible protective training. As the program gained momentum and institutional support, Lina found herself in the unexpected position of being a student leader whose influence extended far beyond her original intentions. The quiet transfer student who had simply wanted to complete her education in peace had become a catalyst for systemic change that would benefit future generations of students. The question remained whether she could maintain the balance between leadership and anonymity that would allow her to complete her own academic goals, while continuing to protect the community that had begun to depend on her guidance and example. The anonymous threats escalated in frequency and specificity as Declan Ward's suspension neared its end, suggesting that his supporters were organizing a coordinated response designed to restore the previous social order through intimidation and retaliation. Emma's documentation revealed patterns in timing and language that indicated multiple participants working from a shared plan rather than individual expressions of resentment. "They're planning something for your birthday," Emma warned during their literature class, showing Lina screenshots of social media conversations that had been forwarded by concerned classmates. "Multiple people have been asking about your schedule and talking about teaching lessons to troublemakers." Lina's 17th birthday fell on a Friday in December, coinciding with the school's winter formal dance that most students would attend. The combination of celebratory distraction and reduced security presence would create opportunities for harassment that might escalate beyond verbal threats into physical confrontation. "Let them come," Lina replied quietly, her voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who had been preparing for such challenges her entire life. "I've been dealing with bullies longer than they've been bullying. If they want to escalate, they'll discover that I'm better prepared than they imagine." However, the situation had evolved beyond individual self-defense into community protection. The students who had begun looking to Lina for leadership and security would also be vulnerable to retaliation from those seeking to restore the previous power structure. Her responsibility now extended to protecting others who lacked her training and capabilities. Ms. Leone approached Lina after class with information that confirmed her suspicions about organized retaliation. Several teachers had observed unusual coordination among students who had previously been associated with Declan's network, including hushed conversations that ended abruptly when adults approached. "I've been teaching here for 15 years, Ms. Leone explained, her voice carrying the authority of experience with adolescent behavioral patterns. "What I'm seeing now feels different from typical teenage drama. This has the structure of a planned operation rather than spontaneous revenge." The warning prompted Lina to implement security measures that drew upon her father's tactical training. She began varying her routes between classes, avoiding predictable patterns that would allow ambush planning. She identified multiple escape routes from every classroom and memorized the locations of security cameras that could provide evidence if incidents occurred. More importantly, she began coordinating with the network of students who had attended her safety workshops, creating an informal communication system that would allow rapid response to threatening situations. The group included Emma's documentation skills, David Park's growing confidence, and Zara Malik's organizational abilities. "We're not looking for fights," Lina explained during a private meeting with her core supporters. "But we need to be prepared to protect ourselves and each other if these people decide to escalate beyond threats." The preparation proved necessary. When the first serious incident occurred during lunch period on Wednesday, 3 underclassmen who had attended Lina's workshops were cornered in the bathroom by a group of girls loyal to Declan's cause. Led by his on and off girlfriend Madison Pierce, a senior whose family wealth provided social immunity similar to Declan's. "You think you're so tough because you learned some karate moves from the foreign freak," Madison sneered, her voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to intimidating others without consequences. "Let's see how tough you are when it's fair numbers." The confrontation was interrupted by Emma's arrival with her ever-present camera, documenting the attempted intimidation while providing witness testimony that would complicate any claims of provocation. Her artistic eye captured the power dynamics at play, showing clearly who was threatening whom. "Madison, what are you doing?" Emma asked innocently, her tone suggesting casual curiosity rather than intervention. "Are you having some kind of problem with Sarah and her friends?" The presence of documentation and witnesses deflated the confrontation's intensity, reminding Madison that actions would have consequences in an environment where evidence could be preserved and shared. The 3 underclassmen escaped without physical harm, but the incident confirmed that the threats were escalating toward action. Principal Danner called an emergency meeting with key students and faculty members to address the growing tensions that threatened to disrupt the school's educational mission. His expression reflected the frustration of an administrator caught between competing demands for order and justice. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention," he began, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority backed by legal concerns. "The harassment and counter-harassment that has developed since the initial incident is creating an environment that interferes with learning and threatens student safety." Lina recognized the implied criticism of her role in the escalating conflicts, understanding that administrators often preferred superficial peace to meaningful change. However, her actions had exposed problems that had existed long before her arrival, and addressing symptoms rather than causes would only ensure their continuation. "Principal Danner, with respect, these problems existed before I arrived at this school," she replied, her tone respectful but firm. "The difference is that now students have options, besides accepting harassment passively. If that creates temporary disruption, it's still preferable to permanent victimization." Ms. Leone supported her position by presenting documentation of harassment incidents that predated Lina's enrollment, demonstrating that the current tensions represented exposure of existing problems rather than creation of new ones. Her military experience provided credibility when discussing the difference between conflict and resolution. "Sometimes peace requires confronting the forces that disrupt it," Ms. Leone observed, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen the consequences of appeasing bullies. "Ms. Torres has shown students that they don't have to accept intimidation, and that knowledge can't be taken away regardless of administrative preferences." The meeting concluded with enhanced security measures during high-risk periods, including additional supervision during lunch and after-school activities. However, Lina understood that institutional protection had limitations and that the ultimate resolution would require direct confrontation with those who refused to accept the new social dynamics. The opportunity for that confrontation arrived sooner than expected when Declan Ward returned from suspension the following Monday, his presence immediately shifting the school's atmospheric tension. His supporters rallied around him like a deposed king returning to reclaim his throne, their whispered conversations and meaningful glances suggesting that plans were being finalized. "He's back," Emma reported during their morning literature class, her voice carrying the mixture of concern and anticipation that preceded inevitable conflicts. And he doesn't look like someone who's learned from his mistakes, Lina observed Declan's movements throughout the day, noting the careful coordination among his supporters and the obvious preparation for some kind of organized action. Her father's training had taught her to recognize the signs of planned aggression, and everything about Declan's behavior suggested that he viewed his return as an opportunity for revenge rather than reconciliation. The confrontation she had been expecting finally materialized during the transition period between classes, when Declan approached her locker with a carefully selected group of supporters. His positioning blocked her escape routes while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation, a tactic that had worked during their previous encounter. "I hope you enjoyed your moment of fame," Declan said, his voice carrying false friendliness that barely masked underlying menace. "But this is still my school, and it's time for things to return to normal." Lina continued organizing her materials, her body language projecting calm confidence, while her tactical awareness cataloged every potential threat and opportunity. She had learned from their previous encounter that these people understood only strength and that any display of weakness would invite escalation. "Normal for whom?" she replied without looking up from her locker. "Your version of normal involved terrorizing students who couldn't defend themselves. That's not normal, that's pathological." The insult struck home, causing Declan's careful composure to crack slightly as he recognized the challenge to his authority. His supporters shifted closer, their body language becoming more aggressive as they prepared for the confrontation that everyone knew was inevitable. "You made a serious mistake when you decided to embarrass me in front of the entire school," Declan continued, his voice dropping to a more menacing register. "And now you're going to learn what happens to foreign freaks who don't know their place." The corridor seemed to hold its breath as students sensed the approaching climax of tensions that had been building for weeks. Those who recognized the signs of impending violence quickly dispersed, leaving only the committed participants and a few brave observers who understood the historical significance of what was about to unfold. Lina closed her locker with deliberate precision, her movements economical and controlled as she turned to face Declan and his assembled supporters. This time there were more of them, 6 students arranged in a loose semicircle that blocked her primary escape routes while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. "You seem to be confused about something fundamental," Lina said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had been trained to handle exactly this type of situation. "I'm not the one who doesn't belong here. You're the one who's been creating an environment where students can't learn without fear." Emma appeared at the edge of the confrontation with her camera ready, understanding that documentation would be crucial regardless of the outcome. Her presence reminded everyone that actions would have consequences and that truth would be preserved, despite attempts to manipulate the narrative. "This ends now," Declan announced, his voice carrying the finality of someone who had convinced himself that overwhelming force would restore his damaged reputation. "You've caused enough problems for our school community." The phrase, "our school community," revealed the depth of his delusion, suggesting that he viewed educational institutions as personal territories rather than shared spaces where all students deserved safety and respect. His supporters nodded in agreement, their expressions reflecting the groupthink that enabled systemic bullying. "You're right," Lina replied, her tone remaining steady despite the escalating tension. "This does end now, but not the way you think." The first attacker came from her left, a football player named Brett Morrison who had been suspended alongside Declan and harbored particular resentment about the damage to his athletic reputation. His approach was telegraphed and clumsy, relying on size and aggression rather than skill or strategy. Lina sidestepped his charge with fluid grace, using his momentum to guide him into the row of lockers while simultaneously positioning herself to address the next threat. The metallic crash of his impact echoed through the corridor like a starting pistol, signaling the beginning of what would become legend. Two more attackers approached simultaneously, attempting to overwhelm her with coordinated assault. Lina's response demonstrated the difference between street fighting and professional combat training. She moved with economy and precision, each technique flowing seamlessly into the next as she neutralized threats with minimal effort. A knee strike to the solar plexus dropped one attacker, while a perfectly executed hip throw sent the second sliding across the polished floor. Her breathing remained steady, her movements fluid, her composure absolute as she demonstrated capabilities that none of them had truly comprehended. Despite witnessing her previous performance, Declan himself hesitated, suddenly realizing that his numerical advantage was meaningless against someone who had been trained to handle multiple attackers with professional efficiency. His remaining supporters began backing away, their courage evaporating as they witnessed their friends being systematically dismantled. "Still think I don't belong here?" Lina asked, her voice carrying no satisfaction in the violence, but absolute certainty about her right to defend herself and others. "Still think you can intimidate people into accepting your vision of normal?" The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Principal Danner and several security officers, drawn by the commotion and the rapidly spreading reports of violence in the junior wing. His expression reflected the weary resignation of someone who had hoped that administrative intervention might prevent the inevitable reckoning. "Everyone stop immediately," he commanded, his voice carrying institutional authority that brought the physical confrontation to a halt. "Security cameras have recorded everything that happened here. Anyone who continues fighting will face criminal charges in addition to disciplinary action." Emma stepped forward with her phone, once again providing crucial documentation that would protect Lina from claims of excessive force or instigation. Her footage clearly showed the numerical advantage held by Declan's group and the defensive nature of Lina's actions. "Principal Danner, I have video evidence of the entire incident," Emma announced, her voice steady despite the emotional intensity of witnessing violence. Miss Torres was defending herself against multiple attackers who initiated the confrontation. The aftermath unfolded with administrative efficiency that reflected hard-learned lessons from the previous incident. Individual interviews were conducted, evidence was reviewed, and decisions were made with careful attention to legal implications and precedent-setting consequences. Declan, Ward and his supporters faced serious disciplinary action, including potential expulsion and criminal charges for coordinated assault. The documentation provided by Emma and security cameras made denial impossible, while the pattern of harassment provided context that supported self-defense claims. More importantly, the incident demonstrated conclusively that the old social order had been permanently disrupted. Students who had previously accepted intimidation passively now understood that resistance was possible, and that bullies could be defeated by those willing to stand up to them. Word of the confrontation spread throughout the school and beyond, carried by social media and eyewitness accounts that transformed Lina from a local legend into a symbol of empowerment for students facing similar challenges. Her story resonated with young people who had felt powerless against institutional bullying and systemic harassment. "You've started something that extends far beyond this school," Ms. Leone observed during a quiet conversation after the administrative review was completed. "Students from other districts are asking how they can implement similar safety programs. You've shown them that change is possible." The observation carried both pride and concern, recognizing that Lina's actions had created ripple effects that would continue long after her graduation. Her demonstration of capability and moral courage had inspired others to question systems that enabled harassment and to demand better protection for vulnerable students. However, the personal cost of leadership was becoming apparent as Lina struggled to balance her academic goals with the expectations of those who looked to her for continued guidance and protection. The quiet transfer student who had simply wanted to complete her education in peace, found herself at the center of a movement that demanded ongoing commitment. "I never wanted to be anyone's savior," she confided to her father during one of their evening conversations. "I just wanted to be left alone to learn and grow without constantly looking over my shoulder for threats." "Sometimes life doesn't give us that choice, Mia," Miguel replied, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had faced similar responsibilities. "When you have capabilities that others lack, you have obligations whether you want them or not. The question is how you handle those obligations in ways that honor both your training and your values." 3 months after the final confrontation, Crescent Hill High had transformed into an institution that prioritized student safety and empowerment over social hierarchies and administrative convenience. The Personal Safety and Awareness Program had become a model for other schools, with educators from across the district visiting to observe its implementation and effectiveness. Lina stood before a packed auditorium, addressing an audience of students, parents, and education professionals who had come to hear about the program's development and impact. Her transformation from invisible transfer student to respected leader was complete, though she wore the recognition with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout her journey. "The goal was never to create fighters," she explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through action rather than appointment. "The goal was to create students who understood their worth and their rights, and who had the tools to protect both when necessary." The program's statistics spoke to its effectiveness. Harassment incidents had decreased by 70%. Student confidence surveys showed marked improvement, and academic performance had increased as students felt safer focusing on learning rather than survival. The transformation had created a culture where bullying was no longer tolerated or ignored. Emma Kaplan had documented the entire journey through photography and video, creating a comprehensive record of institutional change that would serve as a blueprint for other schools facing similar challenges. Her artistic eye had captured not just the dramatic moments of confrontation, but the quiet victories of students who had learned to stand up for themselves and others. "What started as documentation became advocacy," Emma reflected during an interview about her role in the transformation. "When you see injustice clearly, you have a responsibility to make others see it too." Ms. Torres showed us that individual courage can inspire collective change. The program's success had attracted attention from Commander Torres, who visited the school to observe the implementation of concepts he had taught his daughter for personal protection. His pride in her accomplishments was evident as he watched students practice techniques that emphasized awareness and de-escalation over confrontation. "She learned these skills for self-defense," he told Principal Danner during a private meeting. "But she's used them to defend others, and that's the highest expression of what I tried to teach her. True strength protects the vulnerable rather than exploiting them." Zara Malik's Girls Empowerment Club had become the organizational framework for expanding the program's reach, with chapters forming at other schools and community centers. The network provided resources and support for students who wanted to implement similar initiatives in their own educational environments. "Lina showed us that we don't have to accept systems that harm us," Zara explained during a regional conference on student safety. "We can change those systems if we're willing to work together and support each other through the difficult process of transformation." The program's impact extended beyond immediate safety concerns to broader questions about educational equity and student rights. Lina's actions had demonstrated that institutional change was possible when individuals were willing to take personal risks for collective benefit. Principal Danner had initially been skeptical of the program's potential for disruption, but the positive outcomes had converted him into an advocate for student empowerment approaches to safety. His experience with the transformation had changed his understanding of administrative responsibility and the importance of addressing root causes rather than managing symptoms. "We learned that preventing violence requires more than policies and procedures," he explained to a gathering of school administrators. It requires creating environments where students feel empowered to protect themselves and each other, and where adults provide support for those efforts rather than obstacles. The legal ramifications of the incidents had established precedents that protected students' rights to self-defense while maintaining institutional obligations for safety. Declan Ward and his supporters had faced serious consequences that sent clear messages about the costs of harassment and assault. More importantly, the cultural shift had created lasting change that would benefit future generations of students. The normalization of empowerment over victimization had fundamentally altered how conflicts were addressed and resolved within the school community. As her senior year approached, Lina began preparing for her next challenge: admission to the Naval Academy, where she would continue her education while training to follow in her father's footsteps. The leadership experience she had gained at Crescent Hill High had prepared her for the responsibilities that awaited in military service. "I came here hoping to be invisible," she reflected during her final presentation to the school board. "But I learned that visibility comes with responsibility, and that the greatest service we can provide is teaching others to protect themselves and each other." The program would continue after her graduation, with Emma and Zara providing leadership, while new students brought fresh perspectives and energy. The institutional knowledge they had developed would ensure that the transformation remained permanent rather than temporary. Ms. Leone had agreed to serve as the program's faculty advisor indefinitely, her military background providing continuity and credibility as the initiative expanded to other schools. Her commitment ensured that the principles Lina had demonstrated would be preserved and transmitted to future generations. "She taught us that strength isn't about defeating others," Ms. Leone observed during the graduation ceremony, where Lina received recognition for her contributions to student safety. "It's about empowering others to discover their own strength and use it responsibly." The quiet transfer student who had arrived at Crescent Hill High hoping to complete her education in peace had instead transformed an institution and inspired a movement that would continue long after her departure. Her legacy would be measured not in the conflicts she had won, but in the students she had taught to believe in their own worth and capabilities. As Lina walked across the graduation stage, she carried with her the satisfaction of having honored her father's training while creating positive change that extended far beyond her original intentions. The girl who had been raised to protect herself had learned to protect others, and in doing so had discovered the true meaning of strength. The standing ovation that greeted her reflected not just appreciation for her individual achievements, but recognition of the collective transformation she had inspired. Crescent Hill High had become a place where students could learn and grow without fear, where empowerment replaced victimization, and where the quiet courage of one person had created lasting change for thousands of others. Her father's voice echoed in her memory as she accepted her diploma. "True strength lies in restraint, Mia, but sometimes the greatest restraint is knowing when to act decisively for the protection of others." She had learned that lesson well, and she would carry it with her into whatever challenges awaited in her future service to others. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.